Good evening, everybody. Welcome into another YouTube live show. I am John Kurtz. I've got a couple of very interesting stories for us to chew on tonight. Had a tough time debating, to be quite honest, what should be the lead. Now, I went with this Big 12 coaching report about a Big 12 coach being tied to an NFL job, but just as easily, if we're going more broad-based college football view here, could have gone with the Kirk Herbstreit interview that he did with On Three's Andy and Ari earlier this week, which was pretty fascinating. And I've seen a lot of the reaction, and I know the way a lot of you will expect me to react to Kirk Herbstreit, especially judging by what comments of his actually made it to social media. I think it requires a bit more in-depth discussion than just what you saw on social if you did watch the entire interview, which I did. So we'll get into Kirk Herbstreit. Honestly, he walked a lot of stuff back. It was the Indiana comments that got everybody up in arms because it sounded like he was just parroting the SEC propaganda talking points. But, a little bit of contrition from Kirk Herbstreit at the same time, seemingly talking down to fans for about half the interview. So I don't know. It was a bit all over the place from Herbstreit. We've got some news out of the transfer portal, good and bad for Big 12 teams. One of which I think is very good because of some things that I had been hearing about potential tampering going on with Power 2 and Big 12 players. So I will drop some of that on you. And when I say on the outline, new Power 2 scheme, that is about the article Ross Dellinger wrote this week, which is how are teams going to try to circumvent the NIL cap? The revenue sharing cap, I should say, not the NIL cap, but circumvent revenue sharing and get more money to their players outside of that. We're going to talk about that because this is the new frontier, as the article says, and you have teams that are already plotting and scheming and trying to figure out how to do that, as we are in an era where it seems very clear that being able to pay athletes and having the transfer portal out there is certainly helping some of the non-blue blood schools more than it is the blue bloods. So that's the outline. We've got a really good comment from Venmo as well that's going to kick things off, which will be a little bit of the SEC versus everybody else discussion also that I think you guys will be very, very interested in. So, Larry, tampering, if only you knew. Well, trust me, Larry, I know that tampering is just absolutely wild right now. I don't think anybody doubts that. I assume that it happens with every single roster every single year. I get some of that vibe, and I'm actually going to read you some comments back from the fall when I did the summer, when I did my Open for Business Big 12 Anonymous Football Player Survey and got some comments from them, just asking them and the basketball players this fall about the same thing you hear about tampering. I mean, it's definitely out there. The players are not shy about admitting it when they're given anonymity there. So, okay, you guys know the deal. I see you, McMuffin. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. I'll get to your comment in just a moment. But if you want to be like McMuffin and make sure your question or comment makes it on the show tonight, click the $sign below the chat box. It's how you create a super chat. I genuinely appreciate all of you guys who contribute that way. Could not do it without your support, but totally understand if you are not able to. Free ways to support the channel. Totally open to it. It's amazing. Just like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed. If you are somebody watching on Twitter, which we typically get a huge audience from Twitter, hey, just go to youtube.com, search for John Kurtz, click the subscribe button, click the like button. That really helps if you are enjoying the content. And of course, the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter is another way to support me. It is totally free. 3,300 plus Big 12 fans subscribe. All you have to do is go to ofbnews.com. That's ofbnews.com to subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. Totally free. Big 12 news to your inbox multiple times per week. Cut through the SEC and Big 10 bias. Just get what matters to Big 12 fans. Okay. Venmo, John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you're not watching live and you want to get a question or comment in, you can be a part of the conversation as well. Just leave a comment with your Venmo donation at John-Kurtz-4. And we start with Mark, who I appreciate immensely. Thank you, Mark. Mark sent me a very detailed email here with what I think can be a really interesting talking point for everybody here, right? Like, most of the people on this channel are not SEC fans. Some of you are, and I welcome you, SEC fans. You're always welcome into the conversation here. But Mark is coming after the way the SEC schedules and points out some things here that would appear to be, well, it's really a to-do list for the Big 12 to try to stop letting the SEC control the narrative when it comes to college football scheduling. So a lot of detail here, including an entire spreadsheet from Mark. Very passionate, and I appreciate it. And I think there are some very good points made. Here. So let's dive into it. Mark says, there are a number of major points that I wish folks like you and Tim Fitzgerald, Heartland College Sports, 365 Sports, and the Locked On guys would just hammer on constantly until your Mark and the conference offices finally get the message and change how the Big 12 schedules. So the first thing that Mark points out is stop scheduling true non-conference road games. He ran the numbers, and it says the SEC averages less than one true road game per team in their non-conference schedule, and the Big Ten averages less than one half of a true road game per team in the non-conference on the road. Every Big 12 team has at least one. So the SEC's less than one, Big Ten one half, and the SEC, of course, has 4 non-conference games instead of the 3 for the Big 12 because they soften things up and don't want to add that 9th league game. Every Big 12 team has at least one true road game, and some Big 12 teams play 2 true road games. Yeah, I mean, that is something that's happened. You had just one that pops to mind right away is thinking about last year when Texas Tech went to Wyoming, which turned into a pretty bad loss at the beginning of the year. The SEC plays 4 non-conference games, still averages less than one true road game. The Big Ten plays 3 non-cons, but the Big Ten averages less than one half a true road game per team. So making the point that you're just making life harder for yourself. And I do think that, well, BYU had 2 conference losses. They are maybe a good case study here in saying, hey, you get a 2 by your name as a Big 12 team, it's just going to be really, really hard to get legitimate consideration for the playoff anyway. So why make it tougher on yourself in the non-con? Yeah, you might pick up a nice win here or there that's going to help you a bit, but not really, not really. I mean, it might, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to come in there with like an 11-1 or unbeaten record to really get serious at-large consideration. I would actually tend to agree with that for sure. Now, I would say this, some of this might be, Mark, just if you are a Big 12 team, you have less leverage from a scheduling standpoint to like make everybody come to you. Sometimes if you are trying to find a game that's going to be even like certain G5s, they may not want to do a deal where it's just 2 games at your place, none at our place, and they're really pushing hard the home and home, and like you need those games to fill up the schedule. But I would guess that Mark's comeback would be whatever, just dip into FCS and schedule more bye games. Whether that becomes, also a money proposition there, but you'd be paying a G5 team money to come play you too. I'm just saying those to me are some reasons that pop into my head why some of this might be happening. But Mark points out, he says the SEC duped the Big 12 and the now defunct Pac-12 into having much more difficult schedules because a couple of decades ago, the SEC made a big issue of the fact they required teams to schedule at least one Power 5 at the time non-conference game. And they claimed that anybody who didn't follow suit, they were weaker conferences, and everyone fell for it. So the joke was on the Big 12, Big 10, and Pac-12 because they took the bait when the whole time the SEC was simply scheduling another power team to go along with their 8-game conference schedule. So, they have a little bit more coverage there, and they always play the late season FCS game that, has been much discussed and much maligned by some. So Mark's third point here, he says the SEC strength of schedule is garbage and says when you consider all the additional G5 games the SEC plays, the incredible lack of non-conference true road games, and when they schedule those extra week games, which, the late in the season thing, it's patently obvious that in reality, the SEC schedule is much weaker than the Big 12 strength of schedule. That's where if you want to say their non-conference schedule on average might be weaker, we could probably have that discussion. I am certainly somebody who tries my hardest to combat a lot of the unfair SEC narratives. And this year, as I've said many times, they did not deserve special treatment as a league that was above everybody else. But they still are very much in the conversation for the best league out there. And so generally, I mean, your league schedules, well, we can't give them the benefit of like being this otherworldly schedule compared to everybody else. It's probably going to be a tougher schedule in a lot of circumstances than Big 12 schedules. Not all, but a lot. You know, I mean, you could look at like Texas, for instance, what they played this year. Yeah, they had Georgia. Outside of that, I mean, it was a pretty easy SEC schedule. You could bring me somebody from the Big 12 and say, all right, let's sit down and try to compare this. But on average, like I do think an SEC schedule is going to be harder than the Big 12. Doesn't render your first point about, hey, don't schedule true non-conference road games or non-con true road games. Doesn't render that meaningless or anything by any means. I still think that has a lot of merit. But I would at least just say, let's not go too far overboard on this. Now, Mark also makes a point about the Big 12 versus the ACC. So this isn't all necessarily about the SEC. It says many people claim that the ACC is the third best conference, but if you look at the numbers in the spreadsheet, you can readily see the ACC lags far behind the Big 12. The ACC, like the SEC, massively pads their schedule to make themselves look better. The Big 12 played significantly more true road games, and the ACC played significantly more G5 games. One thing that's coming to mind here, the ACC does have geographically, I think it is my perception, like they have more G5s that are just sort of around the area that make it a little bit easier perhaps to get some of those games scheduled. Perhaps, just another theory that I am floating out there. Trying to see average per team. Yeah, I'm going to have to dive a little bit deeper into this spreadsheet. My apologies there, Mark, to get the full ACC numbers. But, I mean, I think that much was very clear by the end of the year this year that the Big 12 is a stronger conference than the ACC. So you're not going to get a whole lot of pushback from me on that front. Mark also says, point 5, travel kills. Not only is the Big 12 scheduling significantly more road games, but on average, the Big 12 is traveling significantly more in order to play those games. Well, and a lot of that, too, is just, I mean, you're in a conference that's so spread out. You've got teams that are traveling a lot anyway over the course of a season. I think you just have a lot of schools where the travel is going to add up and be more wear and tear. Now, the Big 10 is dealing with a bunch of that, too, right? I mean, the Big 12 is not the only league that's dealing with that. And the ACC has some of that, those West Coast teams, you know, Stanford, Cal, not easy for them. There are a number of teams in the sport that are in that sort of really difficult travel situation, but fair point. And then Mark adds, look, additional home games mean more revenue. That's definitely something that's been oft discussed. Teams having to move games for whatever reason, do creative things to try and make more money. These big non-conference neutral games sometimes can be a big fat payout for schools. Home games are, I would just say this though, Mark, like home games are a payday for like the local economy. But if you think about adding another G5 or adding an FCS team, like you are going to have to pay them. That is an expense. Like that's going to be at least a 6-figure line item expense. In a lot of cases, a 7-figure line item expense to pay for that team to come play you. So I would push back a little bit on that. Now, Mark is making the point BYU scheduled East Carolina on the road in a couple of years. BYU grosses on average $7 to $10 million per home game. Instead, they're flying all the way across the country, making no money to play an early season true road game against a G5 opponent. Well, I'd be interested what the contract is on that for them going there to play that. But he says this is mind-numbingly stupid. This is a game that was just recently announced. And there are examples all around the conference of stupid scheduling like this. So, yes, you're going to make, you get ticket revenue, you get local economy boosts, concessions, everything from a home game. But you are also having to pay a significant amount of money to bring those teams in to the game as well. So it's probably a little bit more complicated. I would need an athletic director to dive a little bit deeper into this. But I think in general, I think in general, some of these points are sound. Mark says the SEC schedules to win games. Once they win those games, they tell everyone how much better they are, and the media goes along with it. I think it's that may be a small part of it. I think the SEC is also, they win the most national championships, and that certainly helps. They deliver the most NFL draft picks. They have the top ranked recruiting classes. Now, some of those might be juiced a little bit, as people have pointed out this year, how the recruiting rankings can sometimes work. Definitely would agree with that. But the bottom line is they're winning championships. So that helps fuel the narrative a lot. They get a lot of help, no doubt. And things like this can help them also. But when it matters on the biggest stage, they are winning the biggest games routinely. So I agree with you on your overall point here that it's not great business to be doing a lot of playing non-conference road games, Mark. I would also just say with some of this, you do have to, I think, push back a bit. We got to give the SEC some credit, right? I love the Big 12. I love trying to fight against Power 2 narratives because they get out of control. But we also can't be, we got to be based in reality too. But I appreciate all the work and effort that you put into this. And I do agree, like I said, for the most part with a lot of it. So John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo, if you got something for me like that, I'm always open to it. So you see here, just led the show with that discussion. And another thing, Mark, I was thinking that I was going to add too is it's hard for the Big 12 to go into total SEC mode. Like if the Big 12 were to say, hey, we're going to do 8-team or 8-game league schedules and throw in another FCS team, you are now talking about having to pay another bye game, like another amount of money to guarantee that the team comes in. And then you might be getting less from your TV deal because the TV inventory becomes less valuable when you're not playing an extra game against league teams. So, and that may be why the SEC eventually would have to go to a ninth conference game because they would want more money from all those teams and big brands actually having to line up and play each other again. And we're in a revenue sharing era where you're going to have to hit at least 20.5 mil this first year just to max out on your rev share. It's tough. That is tough. Big 12 schools are stretching to do that. So if you do something that harms your TV deal, that becomes problematic. Now, what you're suggesting is not. You're saying, hey, get rid of games that could be tougher for your teams. Like, hey, don't go play East Carolina. I don't know that, TV networks, for instance, are salivating over BYU at East Carolina. So there's some crossover over all that, but not all of it. McMuffin, thank you for being here, McMuffin. McMuffin says, been a while since I've been able to catch a live. Keep up the great work. Newsletters rock. Thank you, McMuffin. I love the compliments on the newsletters. Spread the word on the newsletters. ofbnews.com to get subscribed to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. Just this week, sent out the Big 12 Basketball Anonymous Players Survey. Some really good comments about the meanest fans of the Big 12 and where those are located. We had fans talking about getting water poured on them, bottles thrown at them. I believe one of the quotes is like, they'll say anything at you out there. It was good stuff. So you can find out where they're talking about. ofbnews.com. Or click the link in the description of the video. I remember to include it there today. So you got that. All right. I see some speculation in the chat about the Big 12 coach, and somebody just assumed that we were talking about Dion here being a Big 12 coach that is connected to an NFL job. Now, I guess you could argue, people say all the time, what's going to happen in Dallas? Would Coach Prime link up somewhere? What about, getting Coach Prime and Shedeur Sanders in Vegas with the Raiders? I saw Nick Wright talking about that. So I know that his name is going to be floated out there some, but this is like completely opposite end of the spectrum when you think about personality-wise, who he is as a coach and being connected to the NFL. And that is one Matt Campbell. So Matt Campbell interest in big jobs, be it college or the NFL, has long ago become a meme. I mean, that got memeified years ago, for sure. Gambling Gauchos doing the Photoshops. I certainly have always had that out there, blankety blank head coach Matt Campbell. It's even moved over into other areas, other people that get fired in high profile jobs. Matt Campbell becomes the immediate replacement there. It's been a meme for a long time because he gets connected with every job. He gets connected with every single job. He was offered an 8-year, $68.5 million contract by the Lions in 2021. I mean, if you just look at this year, the guy was in the mix at North Carolina. It sounded like he kind of said thanks, but no thanks pretty early on in that process. Washington was definitely in the mix of finalists at Washington last year when all of that was happening with like Lance Leipold, Matt Campbell, and then Jed Fish, who actually wound up getting the job. It was like in a whole Big 12. Chris Kleiman's name was being mentioned there too. It was almost like an entirely Big 12 search with everything that was going on at Washington last year. So this happens. But is this one, him now being connected to the Chicago Bears, is it one to take seriously? I would say maybe. I'll ride the fence a little bit on that. And this is not even the first time like this week that we've had a Matt Campbell to the NFL connection, because earlier this week, as you read about in the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, one of the NFL reporters from The Athletic said that his reporting indicated that Matt Campbell would be interested in interviewing with the Jets. And that one I was skeptical of. Like, I mean, look, I don't follow the NFL super closely anymore these days outside of watching Chiefs games. But I know enough to know a toxic situation in the NFL when I see one. I know enough to know that the New York Jets, that is not a place that you want to be. That is not a place conducive to your career and setting you up for a lot of success. I would be very careful about that if I were Matt Campbell. So that one I thought, I don't know anything about that reporter's track record or history, but I might take that with a grain of salt because that is not a good place to be. It's quite different when you're being connected to the Chicago Bears. And so this report comes from the Chicago Tribune. Okay, the Chicago Tribune reporting that Matt Campbell will get an interview. Now, speaking of memes, it has become a meme on Twitter today. I have noticed that like everybody seems to be getting an interview with the Bears. All right. There are a lot of people getting an interview with the Bears. But I would look at this and say, okay, one, this job is not the Jets. And two, you do have a quarterback with like the guy upside, right? And Caleb Williams. That's two things you'd look for. Like, don't be a total disaster of an organization. Not that the Bears have been great, 2 playoff appearances in 14 years, but they're not total disaster status like the Jets. And you have a better quarterback to play with, which is just, it's really like a non-starter in the NFL. If you don't have a good quarterback to really play with, or a high draft pick that you would be walking into where you can draft that guy, maybe that's for the best. If you can like pick the guy, it's just not really a great situation. And if you think, I would say this, Iowa State fans or anybody out there, if you think this would be just a ploy, like a negotiating ploy, trying to get more out of Iowa State, fleece them for more money, better security, whatever. I would first of all say that's definitely not the Matt Campbell reputation, right? Not somebody that would be doing something for the money. He is somebody who famously, a couple of years ago, he took a lot of crap for saying, we're not competing for championships. We're just trying to be the best version of ourselves. I'm paraphrasing there. But that took a lot of heat when it was a question related to the Big 12 championship. And then the other thing is, guys, he just got the extension. That was last month in December. He got an 8-year extension through 2032. So I have a bit of a hard time thinking, well, this guy just weeks after getting an extension is going to take an NFL interview just to scare his job even more, to give him a second extension, sweeten the pot even more after you just went through that, especially when that does not appear to be his MO. Man, it feels to me a little bit more like, hey, I didn't strike while the iron was hot after the last major breakthrough, which was 2020, when go to the Big 12 championship, win the Fiesta Bowl. That was a big, big breakthrough season for Campbell. And then he's had to deal with a bit of a dip over the last couple of years where his name is not quite as much in those circles until he picked it back up a little bit last year and definitely this year. But he went through that dip with the scandal, with a 4-win season. And it feels to me a little bit like, all right, man, I turned it down last time. I didn't take the Lions job. I maybe should try to explore this a little bit more while the iron is hot right now. And it is definitely hot when you just delivered the first double-digit win season in school history, winning 11 games this year. Now, I don't know if you're asking me, like, do I think Matt Campbell would be a great fit at the NFL level? Man, I don't know that his style seems to be a great fit. Seems like more of a college guy, like rah-rah togetherness kind of guy. That to me wouldn't seem to play all that well at the NFL level. So it seems like it would be kind of a weird fit. I don't see it as like a slam dunk to work, but it's obviously it would be a big paycheck and would be a significant, I would imagine, dream come true sort of thing to be an NFL head coach. And he definitely seems like somebody that could get work coming back on the back end of that, back into college, right? Like you think Matt Campbell would all of a sudden, the guy who's been mentioned for every single major opening over the last 6 years in the sport, just because things didn't go well with the Bears, who have made 2 playoff appearances in the last 14 years, would totally torpedo his future college career? I don't think that would be accurate either. So ultimately, I will say, I mentioned everybody getting interviews and this turning into kind of a meme today on social media. Here are the other reported interviewees: Pete Carroll, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, Mike Kafka, Drew Petzing, and Mike Vrabel. I believe Mike Vrabel may have already interviewed, was the reality there for the Bears. So that's a huge list, man. That's a huge list. If you're just playing like Matt Campbell or the field is going to be a massive favorite there. Massive favorite for that job. And it's not like, as I mentioned, Campbell is some slam dunk candidate. In fact, I was just scanning through the comments. It didn't really seem like Bears fans were too thrilled with that as a name. And then the other part of this is I'm reading the Chicago Tribune article, and Ryan Poles, who's the GM of the Bears, says, he's talking about his interview candidates. He says, quote, "It's going to be a diverse group. This will be different backgrounds from offense, defense, special teams, college, pro. We're turning every stone to make sure we're doing this the right way. There's going to be some names that you don't expect that are going to surprise you because we're digging deeper than we ever have before." Kind of makes it feel like, hey, the whole point of this is we're trying to grab as many guys from as many corners of the football world as we possibly can. And Matt Campbell, for whatever reason, that's our college guy. That's the guy that will reach out and grab from college. So to me, could it be that he's just someone they're interviewing for the sake of trying to interview such a wide variety of people? Certainly sounds like that. So if you're asking me what I think is going to happen, I do not expect him to be the next head coach of the Chicago Bears. But I understand, I would say this. I think this is more North Carolina. I saw his name getting thrown around for North Carolina, right, at the beginning of this coaching carousel, this coaching cycle. I was never very worried about that. That seemed like a weird fit. I know North Carolina seemingly was very interested. Didn't seem like anything that Campbell would really be interested in. I think outside of a big time job in the Midwest or upper Midwest, kind of where Matt Campbell's roots are, in Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State, something like that, which it doesn't feel like he's ever ascended to the level of being the favorite at a place like that. This job would scare me more than just your average college job. I guess I'll put it that way. For one, Matt Campbell, and my apologies, my light just conked out on me there. I may try and swap it for you here in just a moment. So anyway, apparently the extra light here does not think that Matt Campbell is going to be the next head coach of the Chicago Bears either. Or maybe it's the lights going out on the tenure at Iowa State. I don't know. Maybe that's another twist. I'll leave you to decide that. If you have anything for me, please continue, fill out the chat. But if you want to make sure your question or comment makes it on tonight, if you click the $ below the chat box, submit a super chat, you will guarantee that you make it on the show tonight. Appreciate everybody who can support that way. Totally understand if not, if you can just like the video And make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I would really, really appreciate that. Many of you are not, judging by the numbers here on these live shows. So please do that, and make sure you subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter at ofbnews.com, or click the link in the description of this video. Let me swap these out real quick. All right, rare that I leave the camera in the middle of the show, but I'm going to do it. Boom. Let there be light. Okay. Kirk Herbstreit, everybody. Kirk Herbstreit. He has become a very unpopular figure in the college football space. And namely, recently, it is because of his comments about Indiana. He finally broke his silence. Like, we never really heard anything else. He did the live hit after the Tennessee-Ohio State game where he trashed Indiana's inclusion into the playoff. And then we never really heard anything after that from him. He did an interview this week with Andy and Ari on 3 and spoke a lot. I will admit, watching the entire interview, I was like, okay, well, what I saw on social was not totally the whole story here. Okay. He's getting crushed for the clips that they put out on social. And I will certainly address that, because I didn't love the clips that were circulating out there on social either. And I kind of thought, man, feels like you're just making things worse for yourself here, Kirk. But I gave the entire interview a listen, and I think it gives me a different perspective here than most. And again, I am the guy that's fighting anti-Power 2 and big brand narratives here, right? But this was like a very all over the place sort of interview and requires a lot of nuanced discussion, I think, from Kirk Herbstreit. So look, I've told you guys for a long time, I feel like Herbstreit has been a big brand guy, kind of a big brand shill, which if you've worked that long at ESPN these days, you know, where ESPN has gone over the last decade, you kind of have to be. So like, I understand it. If you're going to cover college football at a national level and be really successful with it, it's hard to have a whole lot of like pushing against Power 2 narrative in you. And I think that's become very true for Herbstreit. Now, to me, it is still sad, because back in the day when it wasn't quite, the media environment was not nearly as polarized like that, and TV was not controlling the sport nearly as much as they have in this new realignment era. You know, Herbstreit was a really good ambassador for the sport and one of the most likable guys out there. And I thought it was great. So it's sad to see him kind of get swept up in all of that. And I'm giving him a little bit of leeway there with just the reality of, I think, where he's at. Here's what he said about Indiana. He said, quote, Indiana having 11 wins and beating nobody, that doesn't mean they were one of the 12 best teams. Remember, there's a big difference between deserving and best. And he also said Indiana was not a team that should have been on that field against Notre Dame when you consider other teams that could have been there. First comment was the ESPN interview. Next comment was College Game Day, I believe, the next day. So 2 comments where he really like doubled down. He said it one night, and then he doubled down the next day on College Game Day. Indiana was not a team that should have been on that field against Notre Dame when you consider the other teams that could have been there. Now, this is going to come back to be the most damning statement that he made throughout that whole saga when it comes to what he actually said in the On 3 interview. Part of the problem here, too, is that he made those comments from the broadcast booth when he had just watched Tennessee get crushed by Ohio State, lose by a far wider margin than what Indiana lost to Notre Dame by. And so the comments came across as extra tone deaf, because like, dude, you're the guy that just did that game and watched that game, which was not close. So now here's what circulated on social media. There were 2 things. One that I will talk about later, which was something he may well be lying about. Certainly is tough to believe. But this, he really goes off, and this comment watching the interview, this was really pretty unprompted. They did not really lead him into this. It was pretty unprompted that he goes on a rant about, man, all these fans that think I'm about SEC teams and trying to get them in there. Says, quote, we could not have paid for a better Final Four with Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, and Texas. The only one missing is Michigan. So this idea that we want Alabama, Texas A&M, and Auburn, are you kidding me? He's saying, like, big brand-wise, what could we have possibly asked for more than this? And is really, this is the part of the interview where he's kind of talking down to the fans, and he does a lot of that. He went on a long diatribe. It really started with Ohio State fans. So if you want to blame anybody, blame Ohio State fans. But he starts in on a rant about how Ohio State fans treated Ryan Day after losing the Michigan game, and even mentioned Will Howard and talking to those guys and Ryan Day's wife and his kid and everything they had to deal with. And like, yeah, okay, the fans that are going to get that crazy, like, sure, I can be on board with that. But then it transitions into, everybody coming after me for all this and think I'm about big brands. And look, we got the big brands. What is this like SEC thing? Where do people think that I'm coming from with the SEC thing? And that's where I have to take a step back and say, dude, you said Indiana was not a team that should have been on that field when you consider other teams that could have been there. Well, the other teams that could have been there, unless you're a big Miami guy, which I don't know. Did anybody hear Kirk Herbstreit this year stumping for Miami big time? Unless you're a big Miami guy, you're talking about 3 SEC teams if you're saying somebody else should have been there outside of Indiana. So the natural inclination there is to say you'd be somebody pushing for the SEC. It also obviously just matched everything SEC fans were saying. That's a part of the problem, which was oft discussed in that interview. To give Ari credit, he kind of pushed back on Kirk like, hey, to be fair, you were saying basically what SEC fans were saying, whether you realized it or not. Which Kirk was saying, I didn't realize that. I wasn't trying to do that. Whatever. There's going to be some inconsistency here. You have to accept some of that. But he did. Then it gets to the back half of this interview, and Herbstreit starts to walk some things back where they get into the discussion about Indiana. And Kirk said, hey, my bad. I didn't frame that the way that I really wanted to. Here was my point. And now I'm directly quoting from him again. He says, don't take an SEC team, take another Big Ten team. My point wasn't to pick on Indiana. My point was, let's say you had a 9-3 Iowa, and Iowa went to Columbus and Penn State and Ann Arbor and Madison. Just because we get these teams that get to 11 or 12 wins, is it automatically that you get to 11 wins so you get in? Or should Iowa at 9-3 get looked at because they went to Columbus at night? And he goes on to say, my concern would be that if we do this, teams will dumb down their non-conference schedules in a race to 11 or 12 wins, basically. Above all else, and we would get worse games and yada yada. Kind of like what the Greg Byrne at Alabama response was in the immediate aftermath of that. If you remember that, the Alabama AD being basically said, well, we'll never schedule anybody tough again. Why would we do that? Which sort of missed the point because you lost conference games. So Kirk also said, he would go on to say, I'm not saying Indiana wasn't one of the best teams. I just didn't like the logic that got them in. That's on me for pointing to Indiana and using them without further explanation. And then Kirk said, Alabama, this is a direct quote, said Alabama had no shot. I was very, very clear leading up to it. Okay. It's also, again, you got to consider, Kirk, what you did last year with stumping for Alabama over Florida State, which is still very fresh in a lot of people's minds. Kirk would then concede that there was not, Ari started pushing back well, who would you put in? There was not a good option other than Indiana. There was not a 9-3 Iowa that had played those tough road games. And so Kirk conceded. He was like, yeah, you're right. There really wasn't another great option. That's fair. And then he would go on to say, well, when I did that live hit with Linda Cohn, it was at the end of 3 straight grueling days of broadcasting. I really just wanted to go home. So I had more of an edge to me than I normally would. And this is where I will start to have a little bit of empathy and understanding for Kirk Herbstreit and saying, look, I've never been a guy that's traveling across the country to do, multiple broadcasts over the course of 3 or 4 days like he is. But I have done my fair share of broadcasts and grueling days back in the 10 years that I was doing this full time. And when you get to the end of one of those, yeah, you definitely can be caught in a position where you're a lot grumpier than you normally would be because of the situation you've been put in work-wise. So I get it. I understand that. I can level with him a bit on that. Again, part of the problem is then the next day he's doubling down on it with the more damning comments on College Game Day. It's like here and there. But, he then goes on to make this big point about, hey, I love that our sport, we have people that are passionate enough to care like this, and I would rather it be like this than baseball. He pointed out, like, I'm a Reds fan, and there's like 7 of us that actually care. No one really cares. It's a regionalized sport, and people don't get this passionate and fired up about it, and I love that that's where our sport is at. Now I'm like, okay, well, this is better. Maybe lead with this. Why didn't we lead with this? It was kind of speak down to the fans at first and then come back around and make some reasonable comments about, like, hey, I do appreciate the passion. And I'm more lately, and, you might look at this and say, John, I followed you on Twitter for a while and I'll buy this. It's been lately, but lately, I mean, I've toned it down a lot because I'm kind of with him. Like, gets tiring. They had a long discussion about how, you just are in a worse mood when you're sitting around arguing with people on Twitter. And yeah, I mean, I try to do less of it because it just can make you a more miserable person. So, like, I appreciate where he's coming from here. Hey, love the passion. I'm not going to sit around and argue with people as much, but it is great that we work in a place where there's a lot of passion. And those of you who saw my interaction with JD Piquel from On3 the other day, he basically hit me with that too. And he took the high road when I was calling out his comments about the SEC, which, like, hey, he and I do not see eye to eye on the SEC at all. But he was a really good dude about it. And that's one thing he said to me in the DMs when we were talking about it. I was kind of like, hey, man, like, yeah, like, sorry. I appreciate you taking the high road. Sorry for being a dick. And he was like, hey, it's cool. I appreciate that we work in a sport where, like, everyone's this passionate. I'm like, all right, like, I respect and appreciate that attitude. Kind of refreshing, especially with what, Twitter has turned into these days. So there are a lot of pieces of this where I'm like, okay, I can level with you, Kirk. I can level with you. And there's some good there. It was just interspersed in an interview that was also filled with a lot of, like, man, why are you turning into this guy that wants to just talk down to all of college football fandom and be really just kind of high and mighty for a lot of it. Then there's also this. The part that most people are pointing out seems to be a lie. And I definitely doubt, I'll put it this way, I have some doubts about this being fully all the way true. So on the subject of Twitter, Kirk Herbstreit said, quote, I don't have it. My son tweets stuff out. I don't read anything. I don't see anything. The last part, like, I can agree. I can believe. And he was telling Ari Wasserman over and over again in the interview, like, dude, you should delete Twitter. You'll be happier. Just delete it. So him saying, I don't read anything, I don't see anything, I can believe that. For the most part, he wouldn't be sitting around checking the replies. There's no way. I mean, he got bombarded after the Indiana comments. So if you were reading or listening to any of that, I don't know how you would have the self-control to not respond to at least some of it. Now, saying my son tweets stuff out, that I'm more skeptical about. Like, I don't, you're telling me your son is the one who's really doing all that? And, there was one tweet that he responded to somebody I mentioned that the other day on a show, an Oklahoma State fan, that, these BS narratives or whatever. I don't know. Kirk was cussing a lot in this interview. It certainly seemed like it would fit in line with being Kirk and not his son. And it feels like a lot of trust to put in your son, to give them your entire Twitter account, just being a public facing representation of you. That's a lot. So I don't know. That's where I'm just like, there are some things, if Kirk would have just stuck to the back half of the interview where he's showing some contrition and backing down on the Indiana point and saying, I love the fans' passion. Like, I understand it's better that we have a sport where people care like this than we don't. If you would stick to that instead of these Twitter people, I don't have it. My son tweets it out. And, look, you guys think you're so smart thinking you got me nailed for being an SEC shill, but we got the best brands. And, there's even an angle of that where you're like, okay, well, you're still riding in hot here like, hey, what we care about is the brands, and this is great, and all I care about is big brands, which obviously a lot of us around here are not going to like that being like the way you want the sport represented all the time. So I don't know. I will say you should watch the entire interview. I would play you clips, but I'd get flagged. I would certainly lose monetization, maybe worse, here on YouTube. So I can't play you the clips. I wish that I could. So I had to just kind of do that recap the best that I could. But I would encourage you to go watch the whole thing instead of just seeing the social media clips, because I think it's probably a little bit unfair to just use those as the barometer for like the only things that he said. It was a little bit better, but it did feel like a guy who wanted to make some points and say, hey, I'm above you. I study this all the time. I'm giving my opinion and you guys don't know what you're talking about. But then kind of felt bad about it later and was like, all right, you know what? In fairness, here you go. I'll throw you a bone. That's what it felt like to me from Kirk Herbstreit throughout that. All right, got a couple super chats to get to here. Appreciate all of you guys who are here. Alpha Cat, number 12, Lady Cats, up 31-22 over number 22, Utah at half. All right, hey, shout out to Jeff Mitty. He's recruiting up a storm as well. K-State women really carrying things for the basketball efforts at K-State this winter. David, what's up, David? Appreciate you being here. David says, totally bummed if Matt Campbell is moving on from Iowa State. Maybe he's just thinking if college football is going to be like the pros, why not go to the pros? And that could be some of it too. Like professional football becomes a bit more appealing if what you're already doing is kind of like that. And if you think, hey, maybe I'll be a little bit more successful because I'm already getting used to some of the things that come with being an NFL coach, which is roster management with money and how you deal with different problems that can arise when you're having a locker room filled with guys who are making money. Now, I think Iowa State they're certainly not one of the highest spending schools in the country. There's probably a little bit less, and he's got such a good culture. You're probably dealing with a little bit less of that than you are some places. And that's what I would wonder about, just how it translates to the NFL level, his type of culture and vibe with that. But I could be wrong. Look, the NFL's been interested going back to 2021. You've had Lions, Jets, and now Bears, and maybe Jets again, all seemingly interested in him. So though I maybe outside of the Jets, I would trust the football opinions of all of those people, certainly more so than myself. Jason, what's up, Jason? Every Big 12 coach that leaves has failed. Lincoln Riley, Luke Fickell, Matt Rule, Jed Fish. You reminded me of something else. I forgot one of my Venmo comments. I hope that he is still around here. I'm sorry, Jason. It got buried a little bit here, but Jason said Luke Fickell should be rethinking his decision by now. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I know the Wisconsin thing's always been weird, and some of it I think is just like Fickell went in and tried to like change the identity of Wisconsin, which, based on geographically, the pool that you're recruiting from didn't seem to be particularly smart. I'm just not sure that he had the correct philosophy to go in there to Wisconsin. I can understand the appeal of the job, but I can also understand if you're a Cincinnati fan looking at it and being like, dude, this kind of sucks. Like, we're worse. You're definitely worse. We're both, just kind of scuffling around 500 right now. Why'd we break up this marriage? Why couldn't that be us right now that's having like an Arizona State sort of season if you had stuck around? I get it. And the point of, Lincoln Riley has definitely been a failure at USC so far. We'll see how it ends. But so far, Luke Fickell definitely has not met expectations at Wisconsin so far. Matt Rule, I think Rule is doing some good things. I don't think it's fair to say that like Rule has failed. He did take Nebraska to a bowl game for the first time since 2016. So he's done better than anybody in the last near decade at Nebraska. That's at least worth something. And Jed Fish, jury's still out. Certainly was not an impressive first year, but they lost a ton. That roster took a huge hit. In national championship, the coach leaves. Like there was a lot that they had to withstand. I don't think it's totally fair to judge Fish on that, but it has not worked out like pastures have been greener so far, right? Like it has not been something where you're like, oh, clearly you leave and like things immediately become better. None of that. So I'm with you on that. And I know that you're saying this is kind of like a caution to Matt Campbell if he were to leave. And I mean, frankly, I wouldn't expect a ton of immediate success necessarily with the Bears. I think there would probably be a learning curve there too. Michael, LOL, Kirk's we. I'm sure that means him and ESPN. Yes, it does. It does. It definitely does. He said a lot of times, I've never in my 29 years, I don't get, blah, blah, blah. But yes, the we is ESPN. And with him realizing the insinuation there is that ESPN just wants SEC teams into this thing. But that's a good catch. It's a good catch. Obviously, that's the we. It's definitely the we. Okay. Click the $ below the chat box if you got anything you want to guarantee that your question or comment makes it on the show tonight. Here's 2 bits of transfer news going in the opposite directions in the state of Arizona. So, first of all, speaking of Jedd Fisch, here, I didn't even plan that. Jedd Fisch coming straight back to you because we're talking about one thing happening in Arizona that is negative, one thing very positive happening at Arizona State, particularly in the face of potential tampering. So Arizona loses star corner Tacario Davis. Obviously, he had been in the portal for a while, but he chose this week to go play for the Washington Huskies. Number 1 corner in the portal this cycle, second-team All-Big 12 player, definitely a future pro. He had a fabulous 2023. And, it's been obviously a rough season for Brent Brennan. I don't know that it was like the best portal cycle either. A lot of talent went through those doors. Maldonado, Manu, Davis, some big names that exited through the transfer portal for Arizona. And now you got to watch. I feel for Arizona fans because losing a big player when they already had lost, some talent last year to Jedd Fisch, who left you high and dry, and I know is seen as like the real turncoat kind of guy. That's not fun. That's not fun at all, and that's got to really suck to see. And at first, I was kind of like, well, Washington, like why Washington? I'm sure you had plenty of other options there. But then I'm like, okay, well, they have had a good track record with defensive backs. I mean, I'm a Chiefs fan, for goodness sake, right? I know about Trent McDuffie. Pro Bowl snub Trent McDuffie, I might add. But one of, if not the best corner in the NFL. I remember Marcus Peters, who had a nice run in Kansas City once upon a time. Noisy, but nice. And Washington did play in the national championship game 2 years ago, and Jedd Fisch was his coach, and he's going to play he's reuniting with the same position coach that he was with in 2023 in Tucson. So it's like, okay, I can get it. I can understand it. And he gave, in fairness to Tacario Davis, he gave the Brent Brennan thing the old college try, quite literally. Stuck around for a year, gave him an opportunity, now is moving on after he almost left last year. So that's tough. I don't think that's something that's going to make or break Arizona's season. And I don't know. I didn't follow this closely enough to know if was there any hope of him coming back again this time around? I would imagine that there probably was not, but you don't want to see him go to play for Jedd Fisch. Understood. The other news here is about Sam Leavitt, Arizona State's quarterback. Now, Cam Scadaboo's not going to be back. So as quickly as he burst onto the national scene, he's kind of like a shooting star in the night sky, burns out quickly, at least to most of the country who did not watch him throughout the year. Burns out quickly, and you're like, oh, damn, all right, there it goes. He's gone. But Jordan Tyson's back, who's a fabulous receiver, and Sam Leavitt announced this week that he is coming back, who obviously was a tremendous quarterback, the guy that beat out Jaden Rashada, who's now on his third school since that even happened, or about to be anyway. Leavitt's a phenomenal quarterback, phenomenal competitor. I love the guy, competitor. That is a dude who is going to give it his all, and I love the legs, love the athleticism to go along with what he can do throwing the football. Gritty, gutsy performance in the Big 12 championship game. There is a ton to love about the upside and potential there with Sam Leavitt. And so that can fly under the radar, right? Him throwing up the graphic being like, hey, I'm coming back, I'm staying, because I feel like, a lot of people would be like, well, yeah, I mean, Arizona State, you guys are red hot. You just had a fabulous season. Of course you're going to come back. Why would you not? Well, let's go back to the initial comment from the very beginning of the video. I'll bring this one back. Larry, tampering. If only you knew. I'll bring Larry back into the fold here because that's a fair point, Larry. A lot of that is happening. Let me refer to a couple of quotes that I got from the anonymous player survey during football season in the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com, if you want to subscribe to this. One player said, a couple people just came directly to me on social media. Those were wild. I was like, you're an idiot. You're going to get yourself fired. I'm deleting this message. I'm not going to be involved in this. Then there were others that just went through my dad or someone else. Then he also says, another player says, the last 3 years I've had teams reach out to me just saying, hey, we have X, Y, and Z amount of money if you come and play here. I never really entertained them. Just a small sampling. You know, a basketball anonymous player survey that came out this week. You can read plenty of them talking about how tampering has been going on. And one of the quotes there was about it's been going on longer than you guys even know, just with the portal and NIL and stuff. It's been happening since before that. So it happens a lot. And I did have a little birdie tell me that there may have been a certain college football playoff participant really sniffing around Sam Leavitt, trying to entice him to enter the portal. Because, yes, the portal has technically been closed for a while, but the asterisk to that is that you have 5 days after your season ends to enter the portal. So 5 days. There was a 5-day window there after the Texas game and the Peach Bowl for Arizona State to have to try and hold that roster together and make sure that nobody leaves. Sam Leavitt, obviously a part of that. And I will admit, I was watching that pretty intently there, like, okay, that would suck. And it's such a good thing, not just for the Big 12's sake, but for college football's sake. Like, if you have these guys that are going to go be stars, you know, if they can stay at the place that they're at, I think that is great. I understand why guys jump. Obviously, like, I'm a fan of a Power 4 school that is taking players who are making a jump up. K-State just got a offensive tackle committed today from Wagner. Like, yeah, it would be great if these guys would all stay where they were at and back to the old way of college football. It's not how it is, and you have needs, and you have to go get players. I understand it's a bit hypocritical of me to say, but I do think that's a good thing for the sport, man. It doesn't have to be everybody consolidating the power at these Power 2 schools for us to enjoy great football. Arizona State literally just proved that with everybody watching Sam Leavitt in the playoff and Cam Scattaboo in the playoff, that was a really wildly entertaining and fun game. And it can happen with guys that are playing at Arizona State and not just at Texas, right? They can still push Texas. That's not to say the school is Texas, obviously not Texas. They've got plenty at the quarterback position, but thrilled to see that. I will just say, when that came across my social feed, that hit a little bit different, where I was like, okay, good. Arizona State locked that down with Sam Leavitt, especially because I know, Kenny Dillingham seemed to be earlier in the year just trying to, like, get the message out, like, reassure, like, hey guys, like, we're going to have to pay up to keep these guys. Like, the cost of doing business just went up a little bit. Yesterday's price is not today's price. Yesterday's price is not today's price after the season that we just had and the way that these guys balled out. So good on Kenny Dillingham, good on Arizona State. Definitely happy to see that. Okay, Alan says, John, checking in at halftime of the KU Arizona State basketball game. Arizona State is good. Anything new about UConn joining the Big 12? What is the score of that Kansas basketball game? I was too busy prepping. I didn't watch any of that. Ooh, Arizona State up in Allen. What is going on at Allen, dude? I mean, I don't know. There's 19 minutes left. I'm sure Kansas will be fine. But I would have said the same thing about West Virginia the other day. And we saw how that turned out. So anything new about UConn? No, just that there was the Heartland College Sports story the other day where they said Brett Yormark was still interested. So if you missed that video, I think that was maybe about a week ago. That might have been the midweek show last week, Alan, where we had that tiny bit of an update on UConn. I would just still say, as long as Yormark's around, probably not totally dead. They had a better football season, too, this year, winning a bowl game, beating North Carolina. I think they won 9 games this year. Is that what it was? So Jim Mora had a nice season there at UConn. That certainly doesn't hurt in Brett Yormark's case to try and bring them to the league. It's at least something to probably continue to keep your eye on. I would say that. But thank you, Alan. Great to hear from you. Great to see you. And thank you for popping in during the Kansas basketball game just to say hey. Snappy AJ. What's up, Snappy AJ? Happy New Year to you too, my friend. Sorry I've been absent. All enthusiasm in Stillwater dried up months ago. Any chance we remember how to play next year? Well, Snappy AJ, let me just tell you, your basketball team just drilled my basketball team last night. So there's at least a little bit of excitement. Now, there were maybe, 20 people there, which I get. I mean, the way those teams look this year, I understand not drawing a huge crowd. But you got to win, all right? So I'm just pointing out there are some positives. I like, who's the receiver that Oklahoma State landed the other day? I like that kid. I was hoping K-State would have an in there. I can't remember his name. There's too many portal names. This is a problem with the portal. Too many portal names I don't remember. Some good things have been happening. Snappy AJ. I'll just say every time we count Mike Gundy out, he seems to come back with a nice season. Yes, this is further than he has fallen any of those previous times. That is a fair comeback on that. But that's what I got for you. That's what I got for you. Mike Gundy is not somebody, he is very hard to kill. Mike Gundy is difficult to get to go away. He's kind of been, and don't take this the wrong way, but kind of been like the Big 12 cockroach. Like if you think you can get rid of him and he's not going to be a pest and he's not going to beat your team and be around there competing for a Big 12 championship, every time you think you can get rid of him, he's sturdy and he's staying around. So that's what I would say. Probably the greatest compliment I'm sure Mike Gundy feels like he's ever received. Big 12 cockroach there. But I'm telling you, I mean that in an endearing way. Snappy AJ. I mean that in an endearing way. Tom, what's up, Tom? Tom, thank you for being here. Tom says, I've heard pundits say Indiana and SMU shouldn't have been in the college football playoff, but they forget to add Tennessee to that list, even though they were blown out. Yes, well, that is definitely a frustrating piece of all of this. And especially because a lot of those comments were happening like as the Tennessee-Ohio State game is being played, where they're just being run off the field worse than basically anybody. Maybe you could say basically the same rate that SMU was run off the field, right? If not for the late touchdown that they scored, that it would have been the largest deficit of anybody there. I think those people would tell you, well, Tennessee did still earn it. They played a tougher schedule during the regular season, and I would agree. They did. But I think the point that we are making on the other side is like, you can't judge that just on the result of the game in the playoff, because your big bad SEC squad that was supposed to be pretty damn good took it on the chin just as bad or worse than these other teams that you're complaining about. So, point to say, you cannot judge it all based on, hey, this is how the outcome of this game played out. They didn't deserve to be there. No, maybe it's just in this round of the playoff, that's what's typically going to happen, is that teams are going to get blown out. That's what we saw over and over and over again. Anyway, thank you, Tom. Appreciate you being here. You know what? I may tuck this. I know it says on the outline, new Power 2 scheme. I may tuck that away, do a little bit more, spruce it up for you, get you a better take on that for the Sunday show. We will obviously have college football playoff games to react to at that point as well. So very much looking forward to that. I appreciate everybody for being here. Ross Dellinger, if you do want to read up on what's going on with the revenue sharing and how Power 2 schools and some of the big brands are looking at this like, well, we've got to find a way to get a leg up here. One of the big things to earmark from it is the general idea seems to be from that article that, $20.5 million gets thrown out as the revenue sharing number. That's for all sports across your school. The idea there is that it would probably take $20 million for your football roster alone to be truly competitive, which means that you would have to fund like 13, 14, 15 mil through your actual revenue sharing number, and then come up with like 4 to 7 million outside of that, which is how there's a lot of uncertainty as to how that will work and how feasible that will be to get the extra money funneled into it on top of that. So think about that. We talk about how expensive these rosters are. Think about that. Going rate for a championship roster in college football sounds like it will start in the revenue sharing era at about $20 million. 20 mil. Snappy AJ. What's up, Snappy AJ? I wasn't going to bring up Luke's first Big 12 basketball win at your Cat's expense. But yes, adding Jalen Lloyd shows there's some hope. Hey, I appreciate it, Snappy AJ. It's okay. It's okay. You can come at me and remind me of that. It's all right. Boy, yeah. K-State basketball season not looking great. Good thing they've got Houston this weekend. Excited to face Houston. And the next 3 road games are Kansas, Iowa State, and Baylor. That'll be wonderful too. No, congrats, Snappy AJ. I'm happy for you. It's been a rough year in Stillwater, so I'm happy for you that you guys for one day got to enjoy a win there. All right, please subscribe to the Big 12 newsletter, Open for Business, if you want the Big 12 Anonymous Basketball Player Survey. If you want to, go back and read the Big 12 Anonymous Football Player Survey from this fall, you can do it. Just subscribe at ofbnews.com. Join 3,300 plus other Big 12 fans who do read Open for Business. Get Big 12 news straight to your inbox multiple times per week. Cut through the Big 10 and SEC bias to do so. I make it very convenient for you. If you like the video on the way out the door, that would be much appreciated. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. That would also be much appreciated. Spread the word to your family and friends. And take care. Enjoy the college football playoff semifinals this week. And I will talk to you all very soon. Oh, Alan says, Alan Fieldhouse Magic, KU back on top. Yeah, not shocking. Not shocking. I can't see them losing back-to-back home games. But we'll see. We'll see, Arizona State. We'll see. We'll see what you got. All right, take care, guys. I will talk to you very soon.